Go. Well, good evening. Good evening. This is the Friends of Wabakimi winter webinar series. We're going to have a experience tonight. We're going to be talking about the Winisk River, A Great Northern Adventure by Jake. This is in our series of webinars. We actually did our first webinar back on December 3rd, but tonight we're talking about the Winisk River, A Great Northern Adventure. The Winisk is a wild northern river, and I don't know if Jake's a wild guy, but I know he's a hell of a paddler. So we're going to have him talking about the trip tonight. Just to give you a little sense of where all this is at. The Winisk River is actually flows up the Hudson Bay. It starts at a small village, and it ends at a small village about 10 miles from Hudson Bay. I don't know, Jake may have went all the way down the coast. I'm not familiar with that, but it really is an impressive river. I was there over 10 years ago, and I got to be honest, I was overwhelmed by the just the volume of some of the whitewater. But in 2023, the park staff paddled this northern river, and believe it or not, it's actually the responsibility of the Wabakimi Park staff to manage in this remote area. And it's a long way from Thunder Bay. So we've got Jake here tonight to tell us about the trip, but also talking about how the park staff deals with the Wabakimi Node, which is a whole series of parks in and around Wabakimi. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn this over to Jake. And Jake, it's all yours. Hopefully you can get the screen.
Yeah, give me just 1 second to set myself up here. Can everyone see? Oh, wait, there we go. Can everyone see my little background there?
Yeah.
Perfect. And I will start presenting. Title slide, all good? All right. Um, so hi, thanks for that warm welcome. Um, yeah, thanks to the friends for having me on as a speaker. Looking forward to some of the other webinars coming up in the series. And thanks to those who are joining us today. Um, as it says on the screen, I'm Jake Gugenheimer, and I'm the operations technician for the Wabakimi node of parks, which mainly focuses on Wabakimi Provincial Park, but has a lot of other provincial parks under its scope. So, yeah, the presentation itinerary, we're going to go over the introduction and an overview of the trip, the reasons why we went up there, talk about the route. Then we'll dive into some fun photos with the finds that we saw and sightings and kind of the activities that we did. And then pepper me with questions at the end. Yeah. So starting off, I'll introduce you to the team here. Um, Myself, I've been working with Ontario Parks for 5 years now this season, and I started with Wabakimi specifically in May of 2023. I've been in Thunder Bay for 8 years, 8 or 9 now. It's hard to keep track. When I came up here in 2015 for school, for outdoor recreation, and then I finished that and did 2 more years of forestry management at the college in town. My paddle partner was Evan McCall, who's the assistant superintendent of Wabakimi. Um, and yeah, that's where the Winisk River falls under as well, that node. He's been in parks for something like 20 years, and he has a background in biology. So he's a big bird and dragonfly guy. And yeah, catch his webinar. I think it's a week today, on the history of the canoe rangers, if I'm correct.
That is, I believe that is correct.
Yeah, so it'll be a fun one. Um, yeah, and next set of paddlers that was on the trip with us. One is the wonderful Bill Potroff, who is with the Thunder Bay District Health Unit, and Tim Wheeler, who's his friend and the guide that was needed for the health unit to kind of have people sent on this trip. Both of them are volunteer firefighters in their spare time, active outdoors people, and anglers. So some of you might be wondering, hey, why was the Thunder Bay District Health Unit on this trip? So I'll answer that now with our overview slide. Yeah, so this trip was a collaboration between Ontario Parks, Wabakimi Node, and the Thunder Bay District Health Unit. Um, if you've ever been to Wabakimi, you know that we've got lots of outpost camps and lots of other parks that we manage have them as well. So we have a big job of kind of checking in, making sure that everything's um, going well. Land use permits are being followed and responsible and everything. The health unit is there and responsible for inspecting things like gray water disposal and sewage, fuel storage, anything else really that could contaminate and leak into the water and affect the quality of it for people and communities downstream. So that's kind of why they were there. This collaboration also allowed us to split the cost of the trip. Since we had common goals, it was nice to be able to ease that burden. You'll see later, but it was a long flight, long couple of flights. So it's always good to help ends meet there. Yeah, and it should be noted that we had originally also planned to travel with a member of Wabakwi First Nation, which was kind of near the starting point of where we had our trip, and that they were going to track and inventory various community values along the river, like a roller portage for large boats, campsites, portage trails, ecotourism opportunities to better their local economy and stuff like that. Unfortunately, that community member had to back out about a week before the trip started, 1 or 2 weeks before, and yeah, that was too bad. We stayed in contact with our inReach device over the 12 days that we were on the river, but yeah, we got some work done, but a lot of it just the value was lost because they weren't there to, share their knowledge and show us the way. So yeah, pictured here is the roller portage at Bearhead Rapids, um, which is a pretty critical part of infrastructure along the river. Yeah, it's pretty overgrown and it's not as sturdy as it once was. So the community is looking to rebuild and renovate it kind of so that it's up and functioning again. So yeah, we did some site inspections on it and took a bunch of pictures, and hopefully we can assist where we can for future restorations in the coming couple of years here. But yeah, we'll be working closely with them. Next, so some of our other purposes, yeah, are on the screen right now. So we were the first people from Ontario Parks in a work capacity that had been down the river in 11 years. So we had a fairly large agenda for ourselves. Evan and I were trying to identify a bunch of different species along the river, as well as follow up on some specific sites for the first trip that he went on 11 years before. Yeah, so he was on that trip as well. That was 11 years ago. For the portages that we went on, we cleaned up just with hand saws because we didn't have a chainsaw with us, so that was a lot of work. And almost every morning, Evan and I would wake up at 6 a.m. and just walk or paddle to a site that we had decided on, just outside of the river boundary, and just listen for birds and try and get a count of different species that we heard. And so we had to sit still and quiet and just listen for 5 minutes every morning. And rest assured, the bugs were just picking us off slowly but surely. The health unit's objectives were to stop at the various cabins and outposts that were along the river to see, if they were commercial outposts in the past, to see if they were still operating, ensuring any fuels or wastewater, like outhouses and stuff, were appropriately placed and stored and being disposed of. And he was also helping assess some of the outposts that were no longer running, that we knew weren't running anymore, and see if they were suitable to be reopened, if the community wanted to take those on and kind of develop them into more tourist opportunities once again. Yeah, so Vern showed a map earlier, but I've got a visual representation of where we went here. So we left Thunder Bay at 3 a.m. to drive to Nakina. hopefully you're seeing a red arrow on the screen, which was about 3 hours, 4 hours maybe to get there. And then we hopped on our float plane, which took another couple of hours to get, maybe an hour to get up to just north of the community of Wabakimi. So we hopped on Winisk Lake and started paddling. Um, in total, the Winisk River flows 470 kilometers or about 250 or 295 miles, pardon me, all the way to Hudson Bay. But it also starts over at, uh, further east from where we started. So we didn't go that far, but we still went a heck of a distance. So we spent 12 days paddling this blue line here, all the way to the remote community of Peawanuck, which I believe is the second furthest north community in Ontario, next to Fort Severn, or after Fort Severn. And yeah, so that blue line is kind of what the presentation is going to entail today. But we'll get on that in a second. So after the lengthy paddle, we had been fortunate enough to have a single rest day that we spent by hiring a local guide and his freighter canoe, which is just a cool cedar strip boat. And he was kind enough to take us to Hudson Bay and show us the sights along the last 40 kilometers of the river. So unfortunately, we didn't run into any polar bears while we were out there. Yeah, because we're definitely in polar bear country at that point. And then the next day, we had a 4-hour float plane ride back to Nakina with a single stop somewhere about the halfway point for washroom break and an outpost inspection. Um, and then, yeah, tired and weary, we had to drive back to Thunder Bay and finally got home for a total of almost 2,000 kilometers. I don't know what that is in miles, so pardon if there are any Americans here that don't know what that means. I hardly even know what 2,000
Multiply
kilometers
by
means.
0.6 and you'll get a close number.
Okay, do that on your phones in the background as you listen to my voice. Um, and then you'll see how far we went. Yeah, so with that context, out of the way, um, we're going to talk about some finds and sightings that we saw. So these are the broad categories of cool stuff that we saw on our trip. So there was a lot of traditional use hunting camps and cabins by local indigenous communities, as well as a handful of outpost camps. We saw a water monitoring station and other environmental phenomenon, and some interesting flora and fauna. Um, so we're finally going to get into some cool pictures so you can look at stuff and listen to me speak even more. Um, yeah, this is pretty typical of the hunting cabins that we saw that were used by people in nearby communities. Um, you know, it's rustic. It's just what you need. The basics of a counter, a bed, oftentimes a wood stove, depending on if they're 3 or 4 season use. Um, and yeah, so we checked out pretty much all of the cabins that we passed on the river. Um, and yeah, some were a bit newer, some were a bit older, but yeah, they're all interesting to see. Um, this is another cabin from the Winisk. So you can see that this one had a wood stove. You can kind of see the chimney in the background. It's a little more built up with a deck and stuff. But yeah, with costs of shipping materials that far north, yeah, oftentimes they're a lot more bare bones and functional rather than the fancier outposts of the cabins that we see further south, like in Wabakimi and all that. And yeah, that being said, though, there were some relics of a bygone era, um, of some camp and outpost sites for commercial outfitters. So what you see on the screen here is known as Goose Camp, which was a large outpost camp on a big bedrock outcrop. It was a complex of 5 or 6 cabins on the site, with about 4 sleeping cabins, a kitchen building, a small kind of common lodge that was the same size as the buildings on screen. Like it was quaint but lovely. Um, and then some outhouses back in the woods away from the shoreline. On the insides of the cabins were just so many names and dates of people who had come by throughout the years, either paddlers on the Winisk or people who had been using it as a base camp for fall hunting. I don't believe Goose Camp currently operates commercially, but it still does get use by just people who know it exists up there and are in the area. Um, because I think in 2021, it was one of the pandemic years where there wasn't a lot of travel going on, but there were folk up there, and they had a friendly fishing tournament with a bunch of brackets that were just like sharpied onto the wall, and yeah, it was pretty funny to see. Um, yeah, so that's kind of the inside of what the outpost camps would look like. Um, yeah, for hunting or fishing, much like Goose Camp, lots of names and dates were carved on pretty much every cabin, or outpost cabin that we checked in. So we knew there is some occasional use in most of them, but yeah, uh, this one was in relatively okay condition. A lot of them were more worn down than this. And it was really unknown if people who had carved those names were staying there for a bit of time or if they were just kind of passing through. That's something we couldn't be sure of for everyone. Um, yeah, and then moving on, we saw these weird boxes on the side of the river, and Evan recognized them as the water monitoring stations. Um, and they are run by Environment Canada. So yeah, it was just a pair of metal sheds. They're all locked up, and you could see through the crack in the door a little bit. They were full of equipment and stuff. I'm assuming they have satellite internet access, but basically, beside that solar panel there, you can see what looks like a security camera, but it's pointed at the river, and from what I understand, it just kind of sends that feedback to somewhere, and from that interpolates flow rate and water level estimates year round. I'm pretty sure there's been, maybe not this high tech, but there's been some sort of water monitoring station at around this site for over 50 years now. Um, yeah, and lots of other rivers in Canada have water monitoring stations along them that have real-time-ish data. So it's not, the like second per second data, but it's relatively updated. So yeah, if you're ever interested in that or curious if a river that you paddle has one of them, just look up Environment Canada water level monitoring, and you should be able to find a link and then yeah, search up the water body you're looking for. But yeah, it's a good way a trip planning tool, so to speak. Um, yeah, just after that water monitoring station, we saw a forest fire. Um, so yeah, as we may remember, it was a pretty dry and hot summer. We were there from June 19th to July 2nd on the river, so right in the middle of Ontario's fire ban. So we were just cooking with propane, yeah, camp gas stoves, since we weren't allowed to have fires. Um, but yeah, I noticed some puffs of smoke from the river, just like floating in certain areas. And so we called it in, reported it, and it was already being monitored. Looking back on the data after we got finished with the trip, the fire grew to 143 hectares or 350 acres. So it was kind of interesting to see um, that on the ground. It was my first forest fire. Um, and yeah, there was a few little hot spots, but it was mostly out. And it was, yeah, there was, as you can see behind Evan there's some patches of sphagnum moss and a bunch of low areas in this burned spot were just wet enough that they had prevented from being burned. There was one kind of small creek that ran right through the middle of this big area of just char, but it was still lush and green because there was a tiny trickle of a creek that was running through it. Um, yeah, it didn't rain once on our trip though. It was just hot, blistering sun the entire time. So I knew we would see a fire at some point. Um, Now switching from fire to ice, like that segue, anyone? We visited a site where there was permafrost, which was also a first for me. Um, so we had aimed to go back to a site that was visited 11 years ago by Evan to gauge permafrost depth. Um, and yeah, it was marked by this giant fissure that if you look closely in the side of the riverbank on the screen there, um, you can see those, maybe it's a little dark, but kind of the curved lines in the shadows there, those are uh, just layers of ice and sediment. And even though it was like a 25-degree day out, they were just like rock hard underneath there, slowly melting. But yeah, it was weird to see. Um, so yeah, that our site was just a little bit past that, and with the sun beating down on us, we got to work digging a pit to try and see if we could find the depth of the permafrost in that spot. I believe Evan had a GPS coordinate from 11 years ago, so we think we saw the exact site where they had dug a pit before, because the sphagnum looked a little, had like a perfect square kind of outline to it. So we picked a spot right near it and dug about a meter down, but there were no ice crystals present this time. Whereas the first Winisk trip that they were on, there were some visible ice crystals in the sample pit. And permafrost levels, probably change a bit throughout the years, but as we all know, climate change is generally warming up our climate here. Um, so yeah, just not an exact and proper scientific method that we did, but it was just interesting to compare um, what we found on the river there. Next, I I carried a giant camera around with me for the entire 12 days, and this is probably one of the best portraits I got of Evan. Um, he just looks so focused. He's a clever boy with his bug net. Um, and what he's doing in this photo is one of our main goals of the trip, which was cataloging all the animals we saw or heard. In this case, a major part of that collection was getting species information for the third Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas. If you're not familiar with the Breeding Bird Atlas, it's an incredible science initiative between a bunch of different organizations that are looking to map the distribution and relative abundance of Ontario's approximately 300 bird species that breed in the province. Um, so yeah, many places are underrepresented just due to populations and remoteness. So we knew that we had to try and get as much data as we could while we were down the Winisk. Yeah, so every morning, 6 a.m., we'd wake up, walk to a location, spend 5 minutes listening, and yeah, I think Evan got around 70 species total from for birds that he either saw on the river or listened to in the morning. Um, I'm not much of a birder, but I did find these little chicks. Say it was day 9. We were, I think it was a 60-kilometer day. It was hot. I was hangry. We were looking for a mystery campsite, and I was just like crashing through some alder thicket, and I heard a bunch of crashing also right in front of me. And I was like, "Ugh, am I about to get mauled by a bear or a moose? Like, just my luck, what a day." But instead of a bear or a moose, I saw just like a big bird kind of flapping up through the thicket and yeah, flew off to a tree nearby and it was squawking very angrily at me. Um, so I turned around because I didn't want to get clawed at or swooped on. But I thought to myself, Jake, you know why this bird is angry with you. You know why a bird of that size is on the ground. There's a nest here. You have to find the nest. We're looking for birds. Like you'd be a fool if you missed this opportunity. So I was actually only like a meter or two away from it. So I turned around and took out my phone and snapped a quick picture of it, and then I ran away because I didn't want to get attacked. But what you see here are about 4 or 5 chicks. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse on the screen, but that bird in the foreground, you can kind of see its eye and its beak on the left-hand side. But yeah, 4 or 5 chicks of what's likely a short-eared owl. They're pretty much one of the only ground nesters from what I have looked into that would be found in the area. So that was pretty cool. I think they're also a species at risk in Ontario, so that was interesting data to find. Yeah. Speaking of species at risk, everyone's favorite in Wabakimi and the node is the caribou. We only saw one caribou on the entire trip down the Winisk. It was swimming across the river, and we paddled. It was like really far ahead of us, so we paddled super hard to catch up and close enough to grab a photo of it. Luckily, that big camera that I had a really long lens, so we weren't too close to disturb it or anything, but yeah, still a bit far away. But we got this photo, and when we reached the shoreline to see where it was, it had ran off, but we got some really good tracks in the mud. And yeah, that was also my first caribou. It was a lot of firsts for me on this trip, which was awesome. Yeah, so a bunch of species at risk that we've seen already, and everyone's other favorite member of the deer family is the moose, which we had the pleasure of having two of them join us on our paddle down the river. Both of them were submerged up to their eyes, trying to avoid the bugs until they stood up when they saw us and ran into the shore. Um, yeah, but one of them, we kind of saw it run into the water and just like laid down, covered itself, and you could hear it just kind of have a sigh of relief as it got some reprieve from the bugs, which I don't blame them for at all. Um, yeah, insects other than the bugs, the biting bugs, dragonflies were a common sight, which was awesome because yeah, the deer flies and the mosquitoes and the black flies were kind of warded off by them. These guys were our protectors. Um, and yeah, I will say there are a lot of bugs in the Hudson Bay lowlands. You know, it's low, it's full of pools of water that aren't moving a lot. It's the perfect breeding ground for them. But while you're on the river, it's actually not that bad. There's occasionally like a deer fly that would stay in the canoe with you, just biting your ankle, or at least my ankle, um, for an hour or so, but that's okay, rather than the actual swarms that occurred while we got to shore every day. Yeah, yeah, just not enjoying the thought of the bugs while we got to shore, which brings us to a critical piece of gear on any far north canoe trip, which is the bug tent. Um, it's essential. It's just essential for any trip to Hudson Bay, especially in June, which is when we went. Um, it was interesting to see, though, the first 3 days of the trip, we didn't need it, and we were still on the Canadian Shield at that point. But after the falls, or the set of falls that it's called Baskinage Rapids, you're finally into the lowlands, and that's really when the bugs kind of reared their ugly heads. Um, so for the next 8 days after that, the tent was really just a lifesaver and a home for us. Um, I think this was a Eureka 13-foot no bug zone. Um, this was one of the only times that we camped right on the shoreline. Um, and so yeah, it has a bunch of guy lines, and we set it up pretty nice every day. If you pair a bug tent like this with a thermocell or some other kind of bug repellent thing, it's actually really good at keeping the bugs neutralized if they crawl in under the canopy or the get through the doors. You just hear them twitching in the fabric on the bottom of the tent, which sounds a little cruel now that I'm saying it several months later, not surrounded by bugs, but like it's kind of sweet when you've been bitten by them for an hour straight setting up all the tents and camp gear. Um, and yeah, so after we finished paddling, we had a scheduled visit or a scheduled day layover in Peawanuck to get a local guide to visit the coast of Hudson Bay. We left that morning in a freighter canoe, which you just saw, or saw from a guy named Jason, who was our guide, and he navigated us downriver to a few different points of interest along the 40-kilometer trip to the sea. The temperature difference from Peawanuck to the shoreline was crazy. Leaving Peawanuck, it was getting hot, by the end of the day, it was 30 degrees in town, but even within 15 kilometers of the coast of Hudson Bay, it was quite chilly. There was a wall of fog because of the temperature difference. We all had to bundle up. Um, yeah, and then once we got back at mm, late afternoon, early evening, it was still like 25 degrees and we were sweaty again. Um, and yeah, I highly recommend trying to reach out to folks in the community and hiring them if they're willing to, take you for a ride to such a unique place. Jason had so much knowledge. Um, yeah, so one of the places he brought us was to the site of Old Winisk, which was the site of the town a site of a town where Peawanuck used to be until a devastating 1986 flood. Pretty much almost all the buildings were destroyed and two people lost their lives back then. And pictured here was the foundation of the old school for the community. And it was pretty thickly overgrown at this point in time. Um, but there were a few spots near the shore where there was a flag and some sort of memorial to commemorate the town and those who lost their lives. But yeah, Jason gave us a tour and kind of pointed out where uh, the old buildings used to be. And yeah, he had a lot of community knowledge in him. And then we finally made it to the coast. But like I said, it was very foggy, so we couldn't actually see Hudson Bay. We just saw a big wall of white. But there was a bunch of unique plants and uh, tracks of hundreds of caribou that were lining the beach for migrations that occur in the area. And yeah, we looked for polar bear prints because that's about all we would want to see while we were out on the coast, but we didn't see any prints or real bears. Um, and yeah, to confirm it was Hudson Bay, I went to the shore and just dipped a finger in and it was salty. So I can say that I have been to Hudson Bay now, even if I didn't see it. One of the other spots that was on our Hudson Bay itinerary trip was the Mid-Canada Line site 500. Um, and that's just a weird name, but it was a series of over 120 radar monitoring stations that was used to detect incoming attacks over the Arctic during the Cold War. The sites were built between 1956 and 58, but particularly the Mid-Canada Line quickly got outpaced with technology. And so it was out of date by the 60s. And yeah, they closed them down in the late 60s because they weren't super useful. And Site 500 was just north of Peawanuck, and it was only recently cleaned up properly in I think it was 12 or 11 years ago, is when they were starting to clean it up. Um, so all that remains are some roadways joining the middle of the lowlands to the river and a very large pile of metal, which you can kind of see pictured here. Um, it was all clumped together and kind of buried, and the more toxic stuff, I believe, was taken out and barged out off the coast, but stuff that wasn't particularly toxic just got lumped and buried on this site. Um, and it was kind of cool to walk up there because it's the highest point around by far. So you got up there and you could just really see forever, um, or at least for a very long distance. Um, and another thing that they left behind were some of the old staffing cabins, I believe, for this site because they've been used by the community of Peawanuck as goose hunting camps. So there was some sort of agreement that was made to let them or to not have them be torn down with the rest of the site since they were actually kind of useful for the folks that live up there. And, and yeah, so that's kind of the gist of the trip of what we saw. Um, but yeah, I'm going to talk about why this work is important. Um, we really have no idea what's going on in many parks that are seldomly visited, other than what we can find online from trip reports. And sometimes those take a year or two to get edited and posted online. Um, so it's not exactly recent all the time, but it's still really valuable information as far as being a park employee goes. Um, and yeah, we can often, take bits and pieces from those trip reports and see it from a different perspective than some visitors might, like, safety or protections or development opportunities and um, or development threats. So if you do go out on any rivers or parks, please send us a trip report if you're interested. We'd love to hear it. Yeah, it's always useful for us. And yeah, you guys act as wonderful eyes and ears on the ground. Um, yeah, this trip was also important because it gives us a glimpse into other ecosystems. To help us train our plant and identify or pardon me, plant and animal identification skills. We were tracking ranges of different plants and animals. The Winisk has some really unique plant. I didn't show pictures of them because they're not very good pictures, but there was some interesting northern species that are kind of on the southern end of their range. Normally they're way up north in the tundra and stuff like that. So it was cool to see. Um, and invasive species can be noted while we're in the park, like the cow parsnip that we found in a few different spots at the mouth of the river that was likely brought in from barges from decommissioning that radar site. Um, yeah, a lot of people might not be able to tell, but if you've got a keen eye and you're looking for plants like that, it's always good to get a good inventory of them. Um, Also, it's just a fun thing to do. It's an amazing perk of the job. I was so happy and lucky to be on this trip. You know, they pay me the big bucks, and I love getting them. So I love doing the work. Um, Now this is where it might get a little tricky. I made an interactive Google map, marking campsites and points of interest and all the other stuff that we've kind of talked about here. So if you have a smartphone, um, you might be able to point your camera at this QR code on the screen and get to a Google Maps link. If you don't want to do that, we will also put a link into the chat. I might do that at the end of the presentation because I can't actually see the Zoom screen right now. I'm in this view, but I'll give you like an extra 2 seconds to try and scan that if you're interested. And 1, 2, boom. That's kind of what it looks like. So it's all interactable. Yeah, there's details on each of the points, kind of explaining what they were, and I think I tried to include pictures on them as well. So yeah, that'll be kind of interesting, hopefully. If you have any issues with it, hopefully let me know in the comments. I think I made it public, but I also haven't looked at it for several weeks. So anyways, that's kind of all I had planned. So, pepper me with questions. Hopefully you got a little bit inspired or a little bit curious by some of the stuff I said. And yeah, I
Well,
think I will.
here we go, Jake. I'm going to pull a few off the chat. And the first one was one of my questions, which was,
Yeah.
how do you deal with the those abandoned cabins? And I was there 12 years ago or so, and we saw a lot of that as we went down the river, and it was kind of a head scratcher what happened. So, how do you deal with that from a land use permit standpoint? What's the status? What happens to those cabins when they start to deteriorate?
A great question. So there's a lot of camps out and around, and not that many staff. So we kind of, if there are decommissioned camps, an example is this fall we went to what was it, Bright Sand River, just south of Wabakimi, and the resource stewardship crew and myself went to a site, and we there was uh, an old outpost camp that was no longer in use. It was mostly cleaned up, but there was some trash and stuff left behind. So we kind of collected it all for any of the wood and stuff. We had a little fire for ourselves, and yeah, brought a bunch of bags of garbage out. Depending on the location and the materials themselves, it's really going to be a case by case basis, I think. Like a lot of the cabins on the Winisk were just structures made of wood. So there's like, wooden nails. It's not too detrimental other than a safety perspective, I think. But it's really just where we can send people and where we have the resources um extract stuff. Like the Shabasquea Lake cleanup is a good example. Like, you know, we it got flagged. We know people are going by it. It's nasty. There's garbage. And you folks helped fundraise to get all that stuff out. So that's, you know, it's stuff like that. We only have so many staff and so much time on the ground. So if you do see old sites or cabins, then yeah, let us know and hopefully we can add it to the list. But for the most part, it was, yeah, we just kind of inspected them and made sure there was no like immediate threats to like water quality, which we didn't find anything crazy at any of them. They had all been pretty cleaned up.
Just to expand upon Jake's comment, the Friends of Wabakimi did raise a chunk of change to one, help clear portage trails in the Flint River system, which was impacted by the fires of 2023. And as he noted, there was a dump site on Shabasquea Lake, and so that's going to get cleaned up as a result of your donations. Adding on to the question about the cabins, did you see any unauthorized uses? And what do you do when you have an unauthorized use of an Ontario park?
Yeah. So I don't believe we saw any unauthorized uses in that park on this trip. But there in other parks, once again, the Bright Sand River is what I'm thinking about here. There people do, put up structures that are permanent and more than the 23 days that are 21 or 23 days that are allowed to, have structures on a site. So for those, if they're accessible, we usually flag it. We say, hey, the structure is unauthorized, contact us. Maybe you need a land use permit, maybe you just need to take it down right away. So it's kind of hopefully a back and forth. And if they don't reach out to us, then eventually we will go in and disassemble the site, which is kind of one of the reasons we went into Bright Sands this fall as well. A little harder when you are in a park like Winisk. There's a lot of community cabin use, and they've been there like much longer, thousands of years. People have been living there. So yeah, if community use cabins, it's a little trickier. But yeah, they're using the land. It's respectful. It's yeah, not an issue for me at least. Yeah.
Did you see any trumpeter swans?
Yes. The last day we were in the canoe, not the canoe, the freighter canoe, and Jason was taking us down to the coast, and there was a trio of trumpeter swans, and yeah, they were just on the side of the river, and they did a lovely flyby of us. It was kind of cool. I think they were trumpeters anyways.
Yeah, you can't miss them.
Mhm.
Bruce Hires points out that Peawanuck means Flintstone. Flintstone. Did you see the Flintstone site across the river?
Um, I did not.
And I'm
I
drawing a
don't
blank on
actually.
because I was there too, and I don't remember that being identified to me either. So I'm not
Yeah.
familiar with that.
No, I'll have to look into that. That's
Okay.
interesting.
All right. I'm looking for other questions. If you have more questions, drop them in here.
Oh, also
Oh,
let me send that
go,
link in the chat.
go, go, go.
Um I'm seeing some comments on my map because I definitely forgot to put it in there. Sorry, folks. Maybe that'll work. Um, how can you choose best people? You can't. Um, I will say the person I got to know the most was Jason. We spent a solid 10-hour day together. We didn't have a lot of time in Peawanuck. Um, but yeah, we spent a good 10-hour day with Jason, and he shared his knowledge and stories with us the whole time. And he's a funny guy, and just glad that we had him for our guide that day. Um, but yeah, we also the second last day of our trip, we met some people in a boat. We're going upriver, and they saw our canoes on the shore. So we went down and said hello, and they kind of told us a bit of the history of the island that we were staying on. So that was pretty interesting as well. I don't think we caught their names, or at least I kind of showed up to the conversation afterwards, but Evan was talking to them. Um, he greeted them on the shoreline. So um, yeah, pretty much everyone we met in the town was quite nice, though.
Yeah, yeah.
So a lot of them were interested to see, like, oh, you just came up in a canoe, and we were like, yeah, yeah, we're a little crazy.
What was the whitewater, Jake? I think that's a special part of the trip, but
Yeah,
you tell your story.
it
What was the
was.
whitewater like?
The whitewater, so it was a really high, um, it was my first whitewater trip also. I kind of got a crash course on it. Um, Tim Wheeler is like a guide for 20 years now. He does rivers all over the country. Um, and so he was kind of like my crash course instructor, and I picked it up very quickly with his guidance. But yeah, the water level was very high, and it's a pretty shallow, fast-moving river. But as a first-time whitewater paddler at that point in time, I never felt too uncomfortable. There were some um, kind of more challenging areas, but for the most part, I think at that point in time, and I put heavy emphasis on that point in time, um, the whitewater wasn't too bad. When Evan went 11 years before, though, he went in August. So the water was a lot lower, the channels were a lot faster, and there was a lot more risk involved at that point. So it's really a crapshoot. Depending on the season, it's going to be a completely different river every time you go. Um, but yeah, for our trip, it was June 19th to July 2nd. So still a lot of spring runoff, and yeah, it was the biggest river I've ever seen.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know what the cost of the flights were, Jake?
Oh gosh, several thousand, I think.
Yeah.
Um, it's expensive. It's a lot.
When when
Um,
when I did it, it was $10,000 for the four of us. And that was 11 years ago. So it's not cheap. So
yeah.
got a note here. If you're flying in, check with North Star. That's the only airline that flies there. What were the portages like?
Um, Surprisingly good. So we didn't go, the river was so high, we only did like uh maybe six portages total um on that whole river. We did a lot of lining and just, paddling in the whitewater. Um, but a few points, the Bearhead Rapids was that roller portage that we saw at the
Mhm.
beginning. Um, and that's just the roller portage, like there's no side trail, so it was kind of, you know, if you were walking on the logs, it was kind of loose and wiggly, and it was sketchy, so you wanted to just kind of rough it through the grass and the uneven ground. So that one was not great, but it's essential because you can't bypass that rapid. Like you can't go down it or line it. It's just too big. Um, the Tashka Rapid set or the portage was very nice. I don't think there was really anything down even on that trail. Um, Baskinage, Upper and Lower Baskinage Rapids. The first one, Upper Rapid, the portage was good. It was fairly clear to find, and we got into this kind of big pool between the rapids, and then we paddled to where the portage was noted on our 30-year-old map, and there was nothing there because that area had been burned over 15 years ago or something like that. And yeah, so we just kind of uh, didn't know where to go. So we went kind of just did a different route. It wasn't the established portage. I don't know if there is. We kind of tried to break down some grass and point some sticks, but they're going to be washed away by next season anyways. So yeah, that was the only portage that we did where there was trouble for us. Um, Keep in mind later on in the season, you might have to do a lot more portages. But we did clear one like 300, 400 meter portage. I cleared most of it. It gave me an arm workout with the handsaw that day. Um, yeah,
Being
it's pretty
in
cool.
polar bear country and knowing that firearms aren't permitted, is there any specific safety protocol around that, especially being on a work trip?
Um, yeah, we had spray and bangers and took a lot of precautions. Especially with our yeah, food and stuff. Like we were trying to play it as safe as possible. Um, and I don't think we didn't even see any black bears anywhere on the trip either, because there's like a good amount of overlap for black bears. They're in really low densities that far north. So it wasn't too concerning, but yeah, after a certain point you do get into polar bear country. But I think at that time of year it's not super common to see them that far from the coast, but they can go up to 200 kilometers from the coastline. And yeah, we were just kind of hoping. Had our bangers and whatnot.
Uh, Jake, really enjoyed the presentation. Can you list the
You.
top 5 natural wonders of the area that you tripped through?
Um, let's see. Okay, so we went during the solstice. I'm going to count this as a natural wonder. It's not a physical wonder, but the solstice itself, we were so far north. We weren't even that far north, but we were a lot further north than I had ever been. And on the solstice, it was bright until almost midnight. Like you could see the sun, like the faint hints of light on the horizon. And yeah, I was up late that night because I was like, "Whoa, this is so cool! It's so bright, so late." And Evan woke up in the middle of the night to go to the washroom, and it was like 3 or 4 a.m. And he said he could see the sun starting to rise already. So there's only like 4 hours of darkness. So that was cool. Um, let's see. The There were some really awesome cliffs um, that were there. Some limestone cliffs, which are kind of weird. Um, they just kind of they're they just come out of nowhere. You've been paddling a flat, low, uh, swampy river. That's not swampy, but there's swamps to the sides of you for so long, and then there's just like boom, wall of rock. And it's like bright, like a soft yellow, like a white limestone. So that was pretty stunning. It's quite unique for the area. Um, the size of the river also, it's just so wide. It's just ridiculously wide. And I went swimming pretty much every day, but it's quite fast flowing as well. Um, so that was awesome. And it was warm. It was very warm water, even though it was just June. Um, I think there's a good amount of sediment in it, so I'm assuming that's maybe it was, heating up quicker from the sun, from that, but I'm not 100% sure. Two more. Hudson Bay, cool, super neat. Um, and while I didn't see this part, I know there are some, what are they? Drumlins, moraines,
Mhm.
There's some cool glacial things, I don't know, maybe 100 kilometers from the river that we heard Jason, our guide from the area, talking about, and he said they were really cool to check out because he snowmobiles and stuff in the winter, and um, so yeah, those are my five.
Okay. A great presentation. Love to see more photos. Will you be posting more photos somewhere else?
I can I can throw together an album.
Put that together and Dave McTeague, our webmaster, will post it for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll curate some fun ones for folks to get the behind the scenes on the trip.
Okay. Interesting comment here. We had Maurice Mack as a guide at Peawanuck and spent an overnight in Hudson Bay. Excellent guide. Ended up spending 4 more days in town because of the weather. The people were very nice. I got to meet Maurice too, so that's kind of neat. He's obviously
Mhm.
had an impact on a lot of people as they visit.
We met him as well, actually.
Yeah,
He
there you
was
are. Yeah,
he's the caretaker for
he's a neat guy.
mhm.
With the water being high and the lowlands of Hudson Bay, was it fairly easy to find dry campsites?
Um yeah. So the fun part about the river and being in the lowlands is um you're kind of on this giant wide river, and even though the water's high, there's like shallow banks that are even themselves quite dry and nice, and then there's some steeper uh banks. So depending on the day and the site, we would either camp like up way above on the sides of the riverbank and where it was nice and dry, or just on like the rocks that were, you know, also pretty dry from being beaten down by the sun all day. Like I said, it didn't rain once on our trip. It looked like there was going to be a thunderstorm for 30 minutes somewhere in the middle of the trip, and then it just kind of cleared. And then back to sun for the rest of the time. So that was kind of cool. Um, yeah.
Did anybody fish, Jake? And if so, what did they catch and how many?
Yes. So yeah, I'm not much of an angler. I dabble when I can. I need to get my license for 2024 now. Um, but Bill was our primary angler for the trip. Um, we caught a lot of walleye. Or he caught a lot of walleye. So we cooked up a few of those. Very plentiful walleye for the first 4 days while we were on the Canadian Shield still. At Tashka Rapids, he finally got his little brook trout that he was looking for. He knew they were kind of in the area, and so he caught one brookie and then let it go. He just wanted to see if they were there. Um, and then after Baskin Rapids, we got skunked. The rest of the 8 days or whatever it was at that point. He was fishing every day, like he'd just be trolling in the boat and casting near shore and in the middle. Um, and yeah, we just got completely skunked the other 8 days after we got onto the lowlands. Not for a lack of fish. At one point, I looked into the boat beside us and I said, "Oh my God, there's a brook trout right beside us." Like amazing, but they just weren't biting at that point. So it was kind of weird. I
And
think we caught a
I
pike
get
at the end as
ask the
well.
last question, Jake.
Yeah.
Was there still a cross in the cemetery on Chums Island? Did you even see that as you went down, which wouldn't be too far from your takeout point?
Um, yes. Well, okay, no, I didn't see a cross, but yes, we were at Chum's Island. That's the island that we stayed on. We stayed on the tail end of it, or the downriver side of it, and that's where those gentlemen in the boat came up to us and kind of explained the history of the island. We did find a sign. It's probably where the cross used to be, but we didn't see any crosses. But there's a yellow sign that said Chums Island, and we kind of like, huh, what is that about? And then they told us. For those that um, don't know, I believe it was a um, like an Indigenous police officer for
Yep.
Nan, who was I think from Cochrane. He was up north visiting 2008-ish. And there was a boating accident with him and a local community member, and the community member made it to shore safely, but unfortunately, Constable Chum did not survive, and so yeah, they've erected a memorial sign in his honor there.
Thank you. We're right at the hour, and I know there may be more questions, and I'm going to give you a chance here in a second if you want to leave an email. But I just wanted to point out the upcoming programs that we have. You can see the schedule there. I'm doing one on the Green Mantle River on the 16th. You mentioned Evans; he's scheduled for the 17th, and then we have the park superintendent on the 21st. We have a gap in February, and we have one program by Ms. McFarland on March 20th, and we have some other programs that are in the works. We haven't got dates for them yet. So, Jake, would you be willing to take more questions? Are you willing to share an email with us?
Yeah, for sure. I'm just about to throw it into the chat here. I think that's right. Yeah, Jake.Gugenheimer at Ontario.ca. I will say you have to email me shortly because I go on a winter hiatus on January 19th, and I will be out of commission for the winter until springtime somewhere. So if you want more, do it promptly.
And I guess I do get one more question. Are you guys
Of
going to
course.
do another trip in 2024?
Yes, so we do plan. We haven't done too much planning for it yet, but the four of us are planning to go down. I think it was the Albany, a section of the Albany, to check it out and see what's there, because we do know that there are some outpost camps that we'd like to check in on, and yeah, I don't think we've been to the Albany as far as the park is concerned for a little bit. I might be wrong on that because I only started in March, but I've never been there, so I'm excited.
Well, that's a great trip. If you start at Rogers Point and go all the way down, there's 4 major waterfalls. You're going to have a lifetime experience on that, Jake. That's a beautiful stretch of the north. That's a beautiful northern river. So
Awesome. I'm looking
with
forward to it.
with that, if you have any more questions, Jake gave you an email. Feel free to contact him. If he gets us some photos, Dave McTeague will put that up on the website, and we'll make that available. You can see our schedule of upcoming events. And the other side of it is we're always looking for people to do a presentation. And we still have some time at opening. So if you've got an idea, would like to do a presentation, we're more than happy to entertain your presentation if you're willing. So MJ, do you have any other thoughts here? You're the co-host of this webinar series. Anything you want to add here?
Only that one of the webinars that will be coming up that we plan for February is Kristen and I will be doing the presentation on the caribou survey project, and we're moving that from March to February. So look down the road for that.
Very good.
Awesome.
Thank you very, very much for being here. I counted 54 people. That's a good number. We appreciate it. And yeah, that boy, Jake. All right. And so be thinking about your next presentation. We're going to sign you up for next year. Thank you very much.
Will do. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening, everyone, and enjoy your evenings.
You.
You bet. Thank you very much.